Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. Our current session focuses on bi and multilingualism and sociolinguistics. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to relate the two terms and you would be able to understand why it is significant and why it is also interesting to study bilingualism and multilingualism in sociolinguistics. Well, my dear students, at the outset of the session, I would like to clarify that when it comes to the terms bilingualism and multilingualism, most of the times the terms are used as synonymous in the literature that is related to sociolinguistics as well as linguistics. So, though bi means two and multi means more than two, that is many, but when it comes to bilingualism or multilingualism in sociolinguistics, both the terms are used for the ability of a person, that is an individual, or a group or a community to use two or more than two languages. So, technically, for example, if I use the term bilingualism, this may be referring to two languages in use or more than two languages in use. In the same way, when the term multilingualism is used, though it means many languages, but sometimes it may not be many languages, it may be two languages only. And in the current scenario of sociolinguistics, both the terms are acceptable and used as synonyms. Well, my dear students, generally speaking, when we say multilingualism, it is the use of more than one language by, a speaker or as a community, as I have said earlier. Actually, in the popular imagination and in the linguistic theory, multilingualism is often assumed to be an anomalous, exceptional practice. It is thought that this is a very specialized kind of circumstances where this very specialized kind of practice is, practiced by, a certain individual or by a certain community where languages that are practiced are more than one. However, if we look at the world today, actually almost every society is bilingual or multilingual. On the other hand, the term that is used is monolingualism. Monolingualism is using one language, and generally it is thought that monolingualism, this is layman's perception, that monolingualism is the general norm of human, use of language. Yet, both historically and currently, most of the world's communities and a majority of speakers are multilinguals, and it is very rare to find some person or some community that is monolingual. Even from the historical records, the biblical story of Babel suggests a much older distrust of multilingualism in the Western tradition. But, apart from these historical references, when we come to the current world practices, the situation is different. A single universal language was seen as the gift of paradise when it comes to the religious references, while linguistic diversity, hence the need for multilingualism, were presented as more like a divine punishment in certain religions and in the literature related to certain religions, for example Christianity, where this diversity and this spread of human beings was considered to be more like a punishment. Whereas one language, one humanity was the basic divine idea. When we compare this to our religion, for example, in Islam, well, this is completely different. And Islam tells us in the Holy Quran that humanity, was created and then it was divided into tribes and clans and groups to give them different languages and different identities so that they could live in the world and they could do good deeds. However, apart from these historical references and the religious perspectives that are taken by different, religious and ethnic groups on the language practices, when we look at the contemporary world, In fact, there is an increasing flow, what I would say, of communication, the flow of migrants, tighter economic ties across the globe, where people are more connected now in terms of economy, in terms of social practices, in terms of trade, in terms of traveling, etc. This concept of the formation of multinational units such as the European Union and etc. They have added significance as well as acceptability to the processes as well as the phenomenon of bi and multilingualism. So with the passage of time, there is more recognition of the high incidence and practical advantages of being multilingual. So if you look back a few decades back, a century back, how it was perceived was monolinguality and monolingualism was considered A, to be the norm, and B, it was considered to be prestigious, it was considered to be more advantageous. And it was thought that to be multilingual means to be in a problem, to step into a problem, to deal with issues, and it was considered to be a weakness. Today it is opposite of that. Now coming to how this bi and multilingualism relates to, sociolinguistics, why it is significant in sociolinguistics to study bi and multilingualism, and why, it is also interesting. For this purpose, if we just have a quick tour of some of the parts of the world, we would get an idea how and why it is significant. So if we look at different multilingual practices, for example, beyond this Eurocentrism, we can, for example, realize that native South America is a good place to start for studying the relationships between language, territory, culture, literacy, and then, multiplicity of languages, that is, we may call bilingualism or multilingualism. For example, in the Warps area of the northwest Amazon between Colombia and Brazil, the indigenous population that lives in long houses, each long house is more like, it consists of 4 to 8 nuclear families, small families, and these long houses are far distant from each other. Actually, one long house would be distant in terms of, traveling time 1 or more than 1 hours from one long house to the other. In that situation, of course, there are barriers in terms of language choices. There are smaller communities that use different languages, and then to communicate with each other, they try to know each other's languages, and almost everybody in these communities is multilingual. Well, my dear students, anthropologist Jean Jackson, 1974, says that in the 1970s, the native population of 10,000 here was divided into over 20 mutually exclusive groups, each with a distinct name and with a distinct language that was not mutually intelligible. A similar role is played by multilingualism at our next stop, for example, if we take the example of Aboriginal Australia. But assumptions about the relationship between language and territory here are different in Australia. It is not uncommon for a person, to know 4 to 5 languages and to speak them, in their everyday life, especially in the areas of North Queensland. So, multilingualism is more like a routine practice. It is a part of their lives, and, it has great role to play in the family setups that are being created. Even within the current nation states, if we look at the notion of bilingualism with relation to the current states, the modern concept of nation states, the issues of language ideology, the issues of standardization of language, the issues of, creating language identities consciously for the political purposes to give a kind of identity to a nation that would differentiate it from the other nations around or the states around. This is how, bilingualism and multilingualism are playing their role. I would also like to share the example of village of Kapwar from Maharashtra province near Mysore border in India, where there are different languages that are used. For example, Marathi is used as a language of government, of trade, and for schooling. But in Kapwar, there is a population of 3,000. If we go to the calculations of 1960s, there were 4 languages were being used. Landowners and craftsmen were using Kannada. They were speaking Kannada. Muslim minority speaks Urdu. Landless laborers, the lower class, they use Marathi language. They are the speakers of Marathi. And there are rope makers who use Telugu language. So, if we look at the totality of now this whole area, we would realize that, almost everybody is bilingual or multilingual, and multilingualism is the general norm of the society. However, it is very interesting that many women are not. Why? Because women are restricted to household. When they live in the houses, they do not go out. Of course, then there are very less possibilities for them to interact with other languages, with the people who are using other languages. So they are not bilingual or multilingual. So, overall, when we look at the linguistic situation of the world, bilingualism and multilingualism is a norm, and monolingualism is, I would say, in today's world, only an ideal or an exception.